I recently financed a house on a lake an hour from where I live as a second home. My family and I still want to use this house, but I also want to rent it out on Airbnb. And I'm planning to give it out to a rental company for management. My main concern is legal and tax protection. Some advised me to create an LLC to put the house under, but when I did that, the bank threatened to have me forfeit the loan, so I backed off. Now I'm not sure really what to do. Should I just rent it out and raise the insurance ceiling on it, or should I try to refinance it under the LLC? That would apply to any house I would buy in the future, I guess.
All right. Good question. Lots to go into that question, right? It seems so simple sometimes, but there's actually a lot to discuss about your question. The first thing is the concept of mixing business and pleasure, right? Lots of people want to do this. They want to have something they can use sometimes, but somehow figure out a way for it to pay for itself. Right. This is the dream, is to have this second property that pays for itself. So you can go up there whenever you want. But the truth is, when we buy something for consumption reasons, we tend to look at it differently than when we buy something for investment reasons. When we're buying an investment, it's very much a cold, hard look at what the cash flow is. And I don't think when we buy a house, we look at it quite the same way, and that includes second houses. When you're looking at that lake house, you're like, oh, this would be so fun to sit out on the deck, and it's a beautiful view, and I like the neighbors, and none of that goes into buying a rental property. When you're doing that, it's all about how much will this rent for? What will the expenses be? What will the purchase price be? What's the cap rate going to be? Let's evaluate this. Is it a good investment? And I think mixing those two, you get into trouble. You usually end up buying more for consumption reasons and just hoping it works out as a good investment. And I think it's much less likely to. So that's the first thing that pops to mind when I hear this question. What are you concerned about this scheme, Tisha?
So yeah, I would echo what you just said. Is that whenever you have a second home, and you are trying to rent it out, it's good to know that when you didn't buy it as an investment, it may help support some of the costs to have short-term renters in there, but it's probably not going to be a cash flowing property for you. And as long as you're okay with that, that's fine. The other thing is that whenever you try to put in a investment property or any property into an LLC, most mortgages have a due on sale clause. So you can't transfer the property into someone else's name or a business's name without having to pay the mortgage like you encountered. So that is something I haven't heard of it actually happening to a lot of people, but I guess it did happen to you, and it is a possibility in any closing disclosure or any loan document that you come across on a mortgage. So then how do you protect yourself from liability in this kind of situation? Well, LLC is certainly one way to do it. The other way is just insurance. But then again, remember that if you bought it as a homeowner, you're going to need special renters or landlords insurance if you're actually going to be renting this for a significant amount of time. So you're going to need to have a lot of liability coverage, up to $1 million usually, and make sure that you have the right policy that's going to cover short-term renters and also cover any kind of damage or harm that might come to the people that stay in your property just because it's on the water, or it has some other desirable thing that also kind of makes it dangerous.
Yeah, for sure. Docks, boats, lakes, running water. All that stuff adds liability to the equation for sure. You often can have your a mortgage on a property in an LLC. You probably shouldn't do it behind the bank's back, but typically, I think if you are willing to continue to sign for it personally, I think they're usually okay with it. The other option is a non-recourse loan, basically where the loan's just to the LLC. But you know what? The bank's going to want a higher interest rate for that. Not only do you pay a higher interest rate when something is an investment property versus something you're actually living in, but when the bank has no recourse on you personally, it's all even going to be an even higher interest rate. And so it may be the bank balking at the fact that you got this sweet personal loan for an owner-occupied house, and now you basically want to turn it into an investment property and put it in an LLC. I can't blame them for wanting to be paid more for covering that, because it's more risk to them. And so I think that's obviously something to consider. And so you just got to talk to the bank, talk to other banks, say, what are the options? What if I sign for it personally? What if we just go with a non-recourse loan and refinance into that? What if I put some more money into it? So now your loan to value is only 50% instead of 80%, then maybe they'll be a little bit more willing to work with you. And I totally agree with you about the insurance. Umbrella insurance is good. Everybody should have umbrella insurance on all their properties, but you're running a business now too. You need business insurance. And that's not an insignificant amount of liability. Keep in mind too, second homes, the number that most people come up with, the rule of thumb is if you're not going to spend 3 months a year there, it probably doesn't pencil out. You're probably better off renting that space when you go. Even if you're there for a month or two, you're probably better off renting it than you are buying it. And so keep that in mind when you're buying a ski condo, when you're buying a lake house. How much are you really going to use it? And I'm talking about beyond the first year. So we all go up there all the time the first year. I'm talking about beyond that. How much are you really going to use it? And if the truth is you're going to use it 2 weeks a year, this thing is not going to pencil out well for you as a second home. If it turns into this great investment property, that's one thing, but you ought to probably be looking at it as an investment property first in that situation, and then maybe you can use it a little bit. Be aware that you can't buy it in an IRA and use it. If this is owned by your IRA, you cannot use it personally. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. The other issue I see when I hear this question is the whole how leveraged should your life be question, right? And most of us as docs, we come out of school, we owe a ton of student loans. We're trying to get into a practice. We're trying to get into a home. We've got tons of debt. Our ratio of debt to our actual assets might be 40 times. We have 40 times as much debt as we have assets. And if you talk to experts on debt, on using leverage to grow wealth, you will see they recommend a much lower ratio of debt to assets. In fact, the numbers I have seen are 15 to 35%. So if you got $1 million house and you got a $500,000 rental property and you got $500,000 in retirement accounts and you got $500,000 in other investments, that's $2.5 million in assets. They're suggesting how much debt you have on that is in the $350,000 to $800,000 range. Not $2.5 million worth of debt when you've got $1 million worth of assets. So that's a very different scenario. So I think before you go financing a bunch of second homes, especially that aren't actually a need for you, that you really look at how leveraged your overall life is and decide how much leverage you actually want in your life. Because that not only introduces risk to your life, right? Nobody ever went bankrupt without having a bunch of debt, but it also impedes your cash flow, which in turn affects your ability to build wealth. And so ask yourself, what is the plan for leverage in your life? When are you going to reduce it? How much do you want to have long term, et cetera? And keep that in mind when you're doing things like financing a second home that may or may not be a great investment property. And I guess we could talk about Airbnbs too. I mean, Airbnb is a second job. You're running a hotel business. So you've either got to hire somebody to do those aspects of it, whether it's cleaning or turnover, the actual booking, that sort of stuff, or you got to do it yourself. And as a doc, you got to ask yourself, is this a good use of my time? Or am I better off, doing one more case or rounding on one more patient or whatever it is that you do as a doc?
Let me play the devil's advocate here. A lot of real estate investors love short-term rentals because now it's active income that can offset your other active income. And especially if you can put in a significant amount of time into this property in the first year, you can claim rep status, right? And actually get all of the losses written off against your active income. But you have to be spending a considerable amount of time at this property. So a lot of people leverage a short-term rental and then spend a lot of time in on the first year, claim that the rep status and take the tax benefits of that. And the next year, do the same thing with the next property. And then, and outsource after the first year. That's a way to do it. But this, again, like Jim said, this is introducing a lot of different factors into your life to try to get tax benefits. But it's very difficult to be a full-time doctor and do this. So you have to be prepared to be a part-time doctor and
Yeah,
a real
exactly.
estate professional.
I mean, REP stands for real estate professional, right? The requirement's 750 hours a year and no more than that doing anything else. So that means you cannot be practicing more than you're spending time on your real estate business. And you're not going to come up with 750 hours a year on one rental. It's going to take more than that to get to your 750 hours. And at a certain point, you got to ask, what do you want to do with your life? Do you want to be a practicing doc or do you want to go do real estate? And if you want to go do real estate, I totally agree. You should get real estate professional status and get those tax benefits. But if you're actually, went to medical school and residency because you want to practice medicine, this may not work out well for you, unless your spouse is the one who goes for real estate professional status. But we have somebody who works here at the White Coat Investor that has a short-term rental property. It's got 7 units in it, managed primarily by his spouse. And guess what? She doesn't put in 750 hours a year, so they don't get real estate professional status. And that's with 7 units. How many units are you going to be managing? It takes a certain number to really get to 750 hours. I'm sure lots of people fudge the numbers. It's a little bit of a gray area, but come on, it's got to be reasonable or it's not going to pass audit. If you want your questions answered by the White Coat Investor, record your question at whitecoatinvestor.com/YQA or click the link in the description.
The hosts of the White Coat Investor podcast are not licensed accountants, attorneys, or financial advisors. This podcast is free entertainment and information only. It should not be considered professional or personalized financial advice. You should consult the appropriate professional for specific advice relating to your situation.